third graders. Welcome back to Winn Dixie. Chapters 10, 11, and 12. I told Gloria Dump everything. I told her how me and the preacher just moved to Naomi and how I had to leave all my friends behind. I told her about my mama leaving, and I listed out the 10 things that I knew about her, and I explained here in Naomi. I miss Mama more than I ever did in Watley. I told her about the preacher being like a turtle, hiding inside every time in his shell. I told her about finding Winn Dixie in the produce department and how, because of him, I became friends with Miss Franny Block. And I got working for a man named Otis at Gertrude's Pets. And I got invited to Sweetie Pie Thomas's birthday party. I even told Gloria Dump about how Dunlap and Stephen Newberry called her a witch. But I told her they were dumb and mean and bald-headed boys, and I didn't believe 'em, not for long anyhow. And the whole time I was talking, Gloria Dump was listening. She was nodding her head and smiling and frowning and saying, and is that right? I could feel her listening with all her heart, and it felt good. And you know what? She said when I was all done, what? Could it be that you got more of a mama in you than just red hair and freckles and running fast? Really, I said, like what? Well, like maybe you got her green thumb. The two of us could plant something here and see how it grows. Test your thumb out. Okay, I said. What Gloria Dump picked for me to grow was a tree. Or she said it was a tree. To me, it looked more like a plant. She had me dig a hole for it and put it in the ground and pat the dirt around it tight, like I was a baby and I was tucking it into bed. What kind of tree is it? Asked Gloria Dump. It's a wait and see tree. What do you mean? It means you gotta wait for it to grow up before you know what it is. Can I come back and see it tomorrow? I said. Child, she says, as long as it's my garden, you're welcome to it. But that tree ain't gonna have changed much by tomorrow. But I want to see you too, I said. Said Gloria Dump. I ain't going nowhere. I'll be right here. I woke Winn Dixie up there, and he had peanut butter in his whiskers, and he kept yawning and stretching. He licked Gloria Dump's hand before we left, and I thanked her. That night, when the preacher was tucking me into bed, I told him how I got a job at Gertrude's Pets, and I told him about making friends with Miss Fanny Block and getting invited to Sweetie Pie's party. And I told him about meeting Gloria Dump. Winn Dixie lay on the floor, waiting for the preacher to leave so he could hop on the bed like I always did. When I was done talking, the preacher kissed me goodnight, and then he leaned way over and gave Winn Dixie a kiss too, right on the top of his head. You can go ahead and get up here now, he said, Winn Dixie. Winn Dixie looked at the preacher. He didn't smile at him, but he opened his mouth real wide like he was laughing, like the preacher had just told him the funniest joke in the world. And this is what amazed me the most. The preacher laughed back. Winn Dixie hopped on my bed, and the preacher got up and turned out the light. I leaned over and I kissed Winn Dixie too, right on his nose, but he didn't even notice. He was already asleep and snoring. Chapter 11. That night there was a real bad thunderstorm, but what woke me up wasn't the thunder and lightning, it was Winn Dixie, whining and butting his head against my bedroom door. Winn Dixie, I said, what are you doing? He didn't pay much attention to me. He just kept beating his head against the door and whining and whimpering. And when I got out of bed and went over and put my hand on his head, he was shaking and trembling so hard it scared me. I knelt down and I wrapped my arms around him. But he didn't turn and look at me or smile or sneeze or wag his tail or do any kind of normal thing Winn Dixie does. He just kept beating his head against the door and crying and shaking. You want the door open, I said, huh? Is that what you want? I stood up and opened the door, and Winn Dixie flew through it like something big and ugly and mean was chasing him. Winn Dixie, I hissed, you come back here. I didn't want him going and waking the preacher up. But it was too late. Winn Dixie's already at the other end of the trailer in the preacher's room, and I could tell because there was a boing sound that must have come from Winn Dixie jumping on the bed. And then there was a sound from the preacher like he was real surprised. But none of it lasted long because Winn Dixie came tearing back out of the preacher's room, panting and running like crazy. I tried to grab him, but he was going too fast. Opal, said the preacher. He was standing at the door of his bedroom, and his hair was all kind of wild on the top of his head, and he was looking around like he wasn't sure where he was. Opal, what's going on? I don't know, I told him, but just then there was a huge crack of thunder, one that was so loud it shook the whole trailer. And Winn Dixie came shooting out of the room and went running right past me, and I screamed, "Daddy, watch out!" But the preacher was still confused. He just stood there, and Winn Dixie came barreling right toward him like he was bowling ball, and the preacher was the only pin left standing, and wham! They both fell to the ground. "Uh-oh," I said. "Opal," said the preacher. He was lying on his stomach, and Winn Dixie was sitting on top of him, panting and whining. "Yes, sir," I said. "Opal," the preacher said again. "Yes, sir," I said louder. "Do you know what a pathological fear is?" "No, sir," I told him. The preacher raised his hand. He rubbed his nose. "Well," he said after a minute, "it's a fear that goes way beyond normal fears. It's a fear that can't be talked out or reasoned with." Just then there was another crack of thunder, and Winn Dixie rose straight up in the air like somebody had poked him with something hot. When he hit the floor, he started running. He ran back to my bedroom, and I didn't even try to catch him. I just got out of the way. The preacher lay there on the ground, rubbing his nose, and finally he sat up. "Opal, I believe Winn Dixie is a pathological fear of thunderstorms." And just when he finished the sentence, here comes Winn Dixie again, running to save his life. I got the preacher up off the floor and out of the way just in time. There didn't seem to be a thing we could do for Winn Dixie to make him feel better, so we just sat there and watched him run back and forth and all terrorized and panting. And every time there was another crack of thunder, Winn Dixie acted all over again like it was surely the end of the world. "The storm won't last long," the preacher told me, "and when it's over, the real Winn Dixie will come back." After a while, the storm did end, and the rain stopped, and there wasn't any more lightning and thunder. And finally, the last rumble of thunder went away, and Winn Dixie quit running back and forth, and came over to where me and the preacher was sitting, and cocked his head like he was saying, "What in the world are you two doing out of bed in the middle of the night?" And then he crept up on the couch with us in a funny way he has, where he gets on the couch an inch at a time, kind of sliding himself onto it, looking off into another direction like it's all happening by accident, like he doesn't intend to get off the couch, but all of a sudden there he is. And so the three of us sat there. I rubbed Winn Dixie's head and scratched him behind his ears the way he liked. And the preacher said, "There are an awful lot of thunderstorms in Florida in the summertime." "Yes, sir," I said, and I was afraid that maybe he would say we couldn't keep a dog who went crazy with pathological fear every time there was a crack of thunder. "We'll have to keep an eye on him," the preacher said. He put his arm around Winn Dixie. "We'll have to make sure he doesn't get out during the storm. He might run away. We'll have to make sure we keep him safe." "Yes, sir," I said, and all of a sudden it was hard for me to talk. I loved the preacher so much. I loved him because he loved Winn Dixie. I loved him because he was going to forgive Winn Dixie for being afraid. But most of all, I loved him for putting his arm around Winn Dixie like that, like he was already trying to keep him safe. Chapter 12. Me and Winn Dixie got to Gertrude's pad so early for my first day of work that the closed sign was still in the window. But when I pushed on the door, it swung open, so we went inside. I was about to call it to Otis that we were there, but then I heard the music. It was the prettiest music I've ever heard in my life. I looked around to see what it was coming from, and that's when I noticed that all the animals were out of their cages. There were rabbits and hamsters and gerbils and mice and birds and lizards and snakes, and they were all just sitting there on the floor like they had turned to stone. And Otis was staying in the middle of them. He was playing a guitar, and he had his skinny pointed-toed cowboy boots that he was tapping while he was playing music. His eyes were closed, and he was still smiling. Winn Dixie got a dreamy kind of look on his face, and he smiled real hard at Otis, and then he sneezed, and his whiskers went all fuzzy, and his side and he dropped to the floor with all the animals. Just then Gertrude caught sight of Winn Dixie. "Dog!" she croaked, and flew over and landed on his head. Otis looked up at me, and he started playing his guitar, and the spell was broken. The rabbits started hopping, the birds started flying, the lizards started leaping, and the snakes started slithering, and Winn Dixie started barking and chasing everything that was moving. And Otis shouted, "Help me!" For what seemed like a long time, me and Otis ran around trying to catch the snakes and mice and gerbil and hamsters and lizards. We just kept on bumping into each other and tripping over the animals, and Gertrude kept screaming, "Dog, dog!" Every time I caught something, I put it back in the first cage I saw, and I didn't care if it was right cage or not. I just put it in and I slammed the door. And the whole time I was chasing things, I was thinking that Otis must be some kind of a snake charmer, the way he could play his guitar and make the other animals turn to stone. And then I thought, this is silly. I shouted over Winn Dixie barking and Gertrude yelling. I said, play some more music, Otis. He looked at me for a minute, and then he started playing the guitar, and in a few seconds, everything went quiet. Winn Dixie was lying on the floor, blinking his eyes and smiling to himself and sneezing every now and then. And the mice and gerbils and rabbits and lizards and snakes that we hadn't caught yet, they got real quiet and they sat still. And I picked 'em up one by one, put 'em back in their cages. When I was all done, Otis stopped playing. He looked down his boots. I was just playing him some music that makes him happy. Yes, sir, I said. Did they escape from their cages? No, said Otis. I took them out. I felt sorry for them being locked up all the time. I know what it's like being locked up. You do, I said. I've been in jail, Otis said. He looked up at me real quick, and then he looked back down his boots. You have, I said. Oh, never mind, said Otis. Aren't you here to sweep the floor? Yes, sir, I told him. I walked over to the counter, and I started digging through a pile of things, and finally came up with the broom. Here, he said, you should start sweeping. Only he must have gotten confused because he was holding the guitar to me instead of the broom. With your guitar, I said. He blushed and handed me the broom, and I started to work. I was a good sweeper. I swept the whole store, and then I dusted some of the shelves. The whole time I worked, Winn Dixie followed me, and Gertrude followed him, and flying behind him, and sitting on his head, and sitting on his back, and croaking real quiet to herself, dog, dog. When I was done, Otis thanked me. I left Gertrude's Pets thinking about how the preacher probably wouldn't like it very much that I was working for a criminal. Sweetie Pie Thomas was waiting for me right out front. I seen that, she said. She stood there and sucked on her knuckle, and she stared at me. Seen what? I said. I seen all them animals out of their cages, keeping real still. Is that man magic? She said. Kinda, I told her. She hugged Winn Dixie round the neck. Just like the grocery store dog, right? Right, I said. I started walking, and Sweetie Pie took her knuckle out her mouth and put her hand in mine. Are you coming to my birthday party? She asked. I surely am, I said. The theme is pink, she said. I know it, I told her. I gotta go, she said all of a sudden. I gotta go home and tell my mama about what I seen. I live right down there in the yellow house. That's my mama on the porch. You see her? She's waving at you. I waved at the woman on the porch, and she waved back, and I watched Sweetie Pie run off and tell her mama about Otis being a magic man. It made me think about how my mama and how I want to tell her the story about Otis charming the animals. I was collecting stories for her. I would also tell her about Miss Franny and the bear and meeting Gloria Dump and believing for just a minute that she's a witch. And I had a feeling that these were the kind of stories my mama would like, the kind that would make her laugh out loud the way the preacher said she liked to laugh. Thank you for listening, third graders.